You look at the headline and you see the shock value. You see the sensationalism of a former president allegedly forced to sit in a barber's chair and have his signature hair buzzed off. But I want you to look closer, because if you just focus on the humiliation or the spectacle of the haircut, you are missing the much deeper and more terrifying economic reality of what is actually happening here. When we see a figure of immense wealth and power reduced to a gray jumpsuit and a standard military cut, it feels like a glitch in the matrix. Because our entire economic system is built on the premise that capital buys exemption, that wealth purchases a layer of insulation from the gritty, dehumanizing machinery of the state. But what you are witnessing in these reports of hygiene codes and electric clippers is not just a personal embarrassment for one man. It is a rare and jarring glimpse into the industrial logic of the carceral state when it is applied without the usual filters of class privilege. You have to understand that the modern prison system is not designed for rehabilitation or even really for justice in the way you might think of it. It is designed for the efficient management of human inventory. And in that economic model, individuality is an inefficiency, a cost that must be eliminated. The golden hair, the styling products, the wigs, the carefully curated image, all of these are assets in the outside market. They are part of the brand equity that generates value and power. But inside the detention center, they are contraband. They are logistical headaches that the state refuses to subsidize. When the warden reportedly says no wigs allowed and treats a billionaire like inmate number 4599, he is not just being cruel. He is enforcing the brutal egalitarianism of a system where the only currency that matters is compliance. This is where the story gets interesting for us as students of political economy, because usually the legal system functions as a two-tiered pricing structure where the wealthy pay a premium for a different user experience. They get the club-fed prisons, the private consultations, the ability to maintain their social capital, even while incarcerated. But this specific narrative about the shaved head and the refusal to leave the cell signals a collapse of that tiered service model. It suggests that for once the state is prioritizing its own bureaucratic standardization over the market power of the individual, and that is a profound shock to the system. Think about what hair represents in a capitalist society, especially for a man whose entire career has been built on branding and appearance. Hair is a signal. It is a marker of vitality, of status, of being distinct from the herd. To shave it off is to strip away the primary asset of the personal brand. In economic terms, it is a liquidation of social capital. The state is essentially seizing the intellectual property of the persona and destroying it in the name of hygiene and order. You might be cheering for this or you might be horrified by it, but I want you to step back and ask yourself why the system is obsessed with this kind of uniformity. It comes down to the economics of control. A prison, much like a factory floor in the early 20th century, relies on the interchangeability of its units. If you allow one inmate to maintain a high-maintenance aesthetic, you introduce variance. You introduce a hierarchy based on outside status rather than inside behavior. And that threatens the internal market of the prison, where the guards must hold a monopoly on power. The reported screaming, the refusal to come out of the cell, the shame, these are the reactions of a market actor who realizes his currency is suddenly worthless. He is trying to trade on his status, shouting that he is the president, expecting that title to carry exchange value, but he is finding out that in the command economy of a federal detention center, outside status has been demonetized. This is the core conflict we need to analyze today, not the gossip about who held the clippers, but the structural collision between a personality-driven brand and a faceless bureaucratic institution. It is a collision that reveals the fragile nature of the power we project. We think of power as something innate, something that belongs to the person. But this situation demonstrates that power is largely environmental. It relies on the props, the costumes, the lighting, and the difference of others. Strip those away, take away the hairspray and the suit, put the man in a gray jumpsuit under fluorescent lights, and you see the rapid depreciation of the asset. This is exactly what the philosopher Michel Foucault talked about when he described the discipline of the body. The prison system does not just lock you up, it rewrites you. It takes ownership of your physical form. The shaving of the head is the first step in that rewriting process. It is a ritual of admission that says you no longer own yourself. You are now the property of the state. For a working class kid from the inner city, this is a known risk, a priced-in component of navigating a heavily policed society. They grow up knowing that their body can be seized and standardized by the state at any moment. But for a member of the elite, for someone who has spent a lifetime mastering the leverage of capital, this is an alien and traumatic breach of contract. They believe the social contract says, I make money, therefore I am sovereign. The prison barber's chair shatters that contract. It says, your money is no good here. And that is why this story, whether you view it as a tragedy or a farce, is actually a lesson in the ultimate power of the state versus the market. We have spent decades being told that the market is the ultimate authority, that private wealth can solve everything. But here we see the raw, coercive power of the public institution asserting its dominance. It is the state saying, I am the one who holds the scissors. I want you to think about how this affects your own understanding of justice. Do we only feel justice is done when the powerful are humiliated? Is the shaving of the head necessary for public safety? Or is it a form of theater designed to satisfy a public demand for retribution? Economically speaking, there is no efficiency gain in humiliating a 79-year-old man. So the utility of this action must be symbolic. It is about balancing the ledger of social resentment. In a society with massive inequality, where the gap between the billionaire class and the working class has never been wider, seeing a billionaire subjected to the same harsh, degrading intake procedures as a common criminal provides a psychological dividend to the public. It is a form of psychic income. You watch the news, you hear about the shaved head, and you feel a sense of correction, a sense that the scales are balancing, even if your own rent is still too high and your wages are still too flat. It acts as a pressure valve for class tension, but we have to be careful not to mistake this spectacle for systemic change. Shaving one man's head does not fix the tax code. It does not regulate the financial markets. It does not empower unions. It is a symbolic act of leveling that leaves the actual structure of power untouched. We get the show. We get the moment of schadenfreude, but the underlying mechanics of wealth extraction remain in place. So as we walk through this script today, I want to take you beyond the barber's chair. I want to look at the history of how prisons became these sites of identity stripping. We need to look at who profits from the uniforms, the clippers, the commissary, where the inmates buy their basic needs. We need to follow the money that flows through the detention center, because while the inmate is losing his hair, someone else is gaining a contract. There is always a transaction. And in this case, the transaction is trading the dignity of a former president for the validation of the system rules. It is a high-stakes trade. You might be thinking, well, he deserves it. He broke the law. He should face the same consequences as anyone else. And on a surface level, you are right. Equality under the law is a fundamental economic and legal principle. But if the consequences themselves are dehumanizing, if the standard procedure involves breaking a human spirit through forced changes to their appearance, then equality just means we are all equally subject to a brutal system. The goal should not necessarily be to drag the billionaire down to the level of the abused inmate. Maybe the goal should be to ask why the inmate is treated that way in the first place. Why is the removal of individuality a prerequisite for justice? This connects back to the labor market and how we value human beings. In the open market, we are valued for our differences, our unique skills, our presentation. In the prison market, we are valued for our sameness, for our ability to be processed in bulk. The clash we are seeing in these headlines is the clash between these two value systems. The warden is a manager of bulk human capital. Trump is a manager of boutique brand capital. They are speaking different languages. The scream at the guard is the scream of a boutique product being forced into a generic container. And the warden's reply that you are just a number is the cold, hard logic of the assembly line. It is mass production meeting the cult of personality. Now, I want to pivot slightly to the specific claim about hygiene. The leaks say this was done for strict hygiene codes. Let us unpack the economics of that. Hygiene in institutional settings is often a code word for cost control. Lice, disease, maintenance, these are expenses. It is cheaper to shave 1,000 heads than to treat a potential outbreak. It is cheaper to enforce a uniform standard than to inspect individual variations. So the hygiene argument is really an efficiency argument. It is the state saying, we will not spend an extra dime to accommodate your personal preference. This is austerity politics applied to the human body. We see this in our schools, in our hospitals, and most clearly in our prisons. The budget cuts, the privatization of services, the drive to lower the per inmate cost. This is what leads to the policy of the buzz cut. It is not just about discipline. It is about the bottom line. And that is where the irony lies. A man who built his career on cutting costs, on firing people, on maximizing profit is now on the receiving end of a cost-cutting measure. He is being streamlined. He is being downsized. The logic he applied to his businesses is now being applied to his hair. There is a poetic symmetry to it, but also a stark warning about the nature of the systems we have built. If we build systems that prioritize efficiency over dignity, eventually that logic comes for everyone. No amount of gold plating can stop the clippers once you are inside the machine. So when you see that sketch of the new look, when you imagine the gray jumpsuit and the buzzed hair, do not just see a broken man. See a man who has been processed. See a man who has been turned into a commodity by the state. And ask yourself, who owns your image? Who owns your identity? Because in the era of late-stage capitalism, even your hair is only yours as long as you can pay for the right to keep it. We are going to go deeper into the specific mechanisms of this intake process and the wider consequences for the political landscape, because this image, whether it is leaked or just described, is going to shift the political gravity in this country. It changes the perception of invincibility, and in an economy that runs on confidence, losing the aura of invincibility is as dangerous as a bank run. It triggers a sell-off. People start to distance themselves. The creditors call in the loans. The political allies stop returning calls. The shaving of the head is the signal to the market that the asset is distressed. And that is when the real collapse begins. Not when the gavel bangs, but when the image breaks. We have to understand that what is happening inside those walls is the ultimate expression of what economists call a barrier to entry. But in reverse, it is a barrier to exit from the reality that the rest of us live in. When the image breaks, the valuation plummets. We saw this with Enron. We saw this with Theranos. And now we are seeing it with the Trump brand. But I want to take you into the specific mechanics of this intake process because the details matter. They tell us how the system actually functions when it is stripped of political niceties. The reports indicate that after the haircut, there was the issue of the jumpsuit. Now in the free market, clothing is a signaling mechanism. A Brioni suit signals wealth. A red tie signals aggression and branding. A MAGA hat signals tribal loyalty. These are consumer choices that facilitate transactions and signal value to potential buyers or voters. In the federal detention center, consumer choice is abolished. You are issued the standard grade jumpsuit not because it is fashionable, but because it is fungible. It is interchangeable. It costs the taxpayer pennies on the dollar because it is produced at scale, often by other prison laborers earning slave wages. When Trump was handed that jumpsuit, he was essentially being told that his brand premium had been reduced to zero. He was forced to trade his bespoke suit, which might cost $5 or $10,000, for a piece of polyester blend that costs maybe $10. That is a massive deflationary event for his personal economy. And when he reportedly refused to come out of his cell, describing himself as ashamed, he was reacting to that deflation. He knows perhaps better than anyone that his power is not derived from his ideas or his policies, but from his presentation. He is a creature of the camera. Without the costume, the character does not work. And if the character does not work, the movement does not have a leader. It just has a grumpy elderly man in a cage. This is where the psychology of the prison system intersects with the economics of celebrity. The warden, by enforcing these rules, is engaging in a form of asset seizure. He is seizing the visual assets that Trump uses to maintain his market position. You might ask, is this legal? Is this fair? The answer lies in the bureaucratic machinery of the Department of Justice. The Bureau of Prisons operates under a strict set of guidelines known as program statements. These are the corporate bylaws of the incarceration industry. They dictate everything from the caloric content of the meals to the length of the fingernails. There is no clause in these documents for former presidents or billionaire real estate tycoons. There is no exemption for people who really need their hair to look good for television. The bureaucracy is blind to these market distinctions. And that blindness, which usually infuriates us when we are waiting in line at the Department of Motor Vehicles or dealing with the Internal Revenue Service, is suddenly functioning as a tool of radical equality. It is the one place in America where money cannot buy a fast pass. Think about how rare that is. In healthcare, you can buy better treatment. In education, you can buy admission. In the courts, you can buy better lawyers. But in the intake room of a federal prison, the market is suspended. The clippers do not care who you are. The jumpsuit fits the same on a poor man as it does on a rich man. This suspension of market rules is terrifying to someone like Trump because his entire life has been defined by his ability to manipulate market rules. He negotiates, he leverages, he sues, he settles, but you cannot sue the barber. You cannot negotiate with the warden about the length of the buzz cut. The transaction is non-negotiable. This is a command economy in its purest form, and for a capitalist who thrives on deregulation, being trapped in the most heavily regulated environment on Earth is a special kind of hell. I want you to think about the labor aspect of this as well. Who is cutting the hair? Likely another inmate. A barber in the federal system is often a prisoner who has earned the privilege of holding the scissors. This creates a fascinating microeconomic power dynamic. You have a prisoner perhaps serving time for a nonviolent drug offense, perhaps someone from a marginalized community that Trump has demonized holding the physical power to alter the appearance of the man who used to command the most powerful military in the world. In that moment, the class hierarchy is inverted. The laborer holds the tool. The executive is the raw material. It is a moment of profound leveling. And the witness reports that Trump was screaming at the guards, reminding them of his title, reveal his desperate attempt to reinstate the old hierarchy. He is trying to use his verbal currency, I am the president, to override the physical reality of the situation. But in prison, verbal currency is subject to hyperinflation. Everyone claims to be innocent. Everyone claims to be someone important. The market is flooded with these claims, so they lose all value. The guards hear it every day. To them, I am the president sounds just like I did not do it. It is just noise in the system. The warden's response, in here you are just inmate number 4599, is the ultimate corrective. It replaces the subjective identity, the name, the title, the brand, with an objective numerical identifier. It turns the person into a unit of data. This is what the state does. It counts, it catalogs, it processes. And Trump is now just another entry in the ledger. This brings us to the deep state narrative. Trump's supporters will look at the shaved head and see proof of a conspiracy. They will say this is a deliberate humiliation ritual orchestrated by his political enemies. And in a way, they are identifying a real phenomenon, but they are mislabeling it. It is not a conspiracy in the sense of a secret meeting in a smoke-filled room. It is the standard operating procedure of a system designed to strip individuality. It feels like a conspiracy because it is so alien to how we treat the wealthy. We are so used to the wealthy being treated with kid gloves that when they are treated with the standard iron fist, it looks like persecution. But ask yourself, if this were a poor kid from Chicago caught with an ounce of weed, would we be talking about the humiliation of his haircut? Would we be debating the psychological warfare of his jumpsuit? No, we would accept it as part of the process. We would say, well, you should not have broken the law. The shock we feel now is the shock of recognition. We are realizing that the prison system is a machine designed to humiliate, and for the first time we are seeing it chew up someone who we thought was too big to fit in the grinder. This exposes the class bias in our own empathy. We are conditioned to feel more sympathy for the fall of a king than for the crushing of a peasant. The media coverage reinforces this. We are obsessing over Trump hair because it is a symbol of his power. But thousands of men lose their hair, their names, and their dignity in these centers every single week. And there are no leaks, no sketches, no national debates. So when we analyze the psychological warfare of this moment, we have to admit that the prison system itself is a psychological weapon. It is designed to break the will. That is its function. It is not a bug. It is a feature. The goal is compliance. A broken man is a compliant inmate. An inmate who is ashamed of his appearance is less likely to organize a riot, less likely to challenge authority, less likely to cause trouble. It is a management strategy. By stripping Trump of his wigs and his products, the administration is essentially engaging in risk management. They are neutralizing a charismatic leader by removing the source of his charisma without the visual cues of the strong man. He becomes just an old man. It is harder to command a movement from a cell when you look like a defeated pensioner. This is why he is hiding. He knows the economics of optics. He knows that if a photo of him with a buzz cut and a gray jumpsuit hits the internet, his stock price, both politically and literally, for his media company, crashes. The meme potential alone is a weapon of mass destruction against his brand. He is hoarding his own image right now, creating an artificial scarcity because he knows the moment the market sees the reality, the illusion is over. He is trying to maintain a monopoly on his visual narrative, but the state has already broken that monopoly. The sketch I mentioned earlier, that is the market filling the void. That is the public demand for information bypassing the blockade. We are going to see a flood of these images, some real, some fake, but all of them reinforcing the new reality. The golden era is over and the gray era has begun. This shift has massive implications for the Republican Party and the wider political ecosystem. The party has tethered itself to the image of Trump as a winner, a fighter, a man who is untouchable. What happens when the untouchable man is touched, processed, and shaved? It creates a cognitive dissonance in the base. Some will radicalize seeing him as a martyr, a political prisoner akin to Nelson Mandela, although the comparison collapses under the slightest economic scrutiny given Mandela fight for equality versus Trump fight for oligarchy. But others, the donor class, the transactional allies, they will look at the shaved head and see a liability. They are investors, and investors hate uncertainty. A leader in a jumpsuit is a very uncertain asset. We might start to see a hedging of bets. We might see the money start to flow quietly to other candidates who still have their hair and their freedom. This is the ruthlessness of political capital. It is loyal only to power, and power is visual. If you look weak, you are weak. The haircut is a signal of weakness, not because hair matters, but because the inability to stop the haircut matters. It proves he is no longer in control. And in the authoritarian mindset that he cultivates, the leader must always be in control. Losing control of your own follicles is a fatal blow to the myth of the Superman. As we move deeper into this story, we need to look at the reaction of the institutions around him. The Secret Service, for example, they are there to protect his life, but they cannot protect his dignity. That is a fascinating boundary. They can take a bullet for him, but they cannot stop the barber. They have to stand there. And in today's digital world, cryptocurrency is no longer just a trend. For many people, it has become a real business opportunity that can be started with basic knowledge and an internet connection. The first step in treating crypto as a business is education. Understanding simple concepts like Bitcoin, Ethereum, wallets, exchanges, and how the market works is essential before putting in any money. Some people use trading to earn short-term profits, while others focus on long-term holding. And there are also options like staking and passive income where crypto can grow over time without constant buying and selling. What makes crypto attractive is flexibility. You can work from anywhere, control your own schedule, and start with a small amount if you are careful. However, crypto is not gambling. Successful people treat it seriously. They do proper research, manage risk wisely, and never invest money they cannot afford to lose. The market goes up and down, so patience and discipline matter more than chasing quick profits. When crypto is handled with planning and consistency, it can become a long-term income path instead of a risky shortcut. If you want more simple and practical videos about crypto and online income, make sure to subscribe to the channel and stay connected for upcoming content.